everyone, and thank you so very much for joining us for the fourth opening panel of TDO Connections. My name is Quodesia DeVay Johnson. I also go by Quo Johnson. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am your co-moderator for today's speaking. I am joined by my co-moderator and wonderful and brilliant friend, Kristian Roberts. Kristian.
Stop it now, stop. You flatter me. Thank you, Cole. I really do appreciate it. I'm Kristian Roberts. I'm the Director of Education here at the Dallas Opera. Quo and I go back so many years. It's not even funny. We had a podcast together. Check it out. Okay, and a shameless plug. It is available on Dallas Opera's YouTube channel that you're watching in from now. All right. But I'm very excited to be here today, Quo. So let's take a little time to acknowledge the land and the people.
For sure. Thank you for that. The Dallas Opera has a land and people acknowledgement practice. We are committed to creating belonging and supporting belonging in opera and the stories we tell, and part of that includes acknowledging the land. So we do want to acknowledge that this is the ancestral land of the Caddo, Wichita, and Comanche sovereign nations who lived in this place that is now called Dallas since time immemorial. There is evidence that they were here for 12,000 years and still continue to care for the land. So it is important that as we work together, that we bring this truth and what it means for us to be here all together. We also want to acknowledge that Dallas was built by people who were stolen from their homes off the coast of Africa and brought here and forced into free and enslaved labor. Now, as a descendant of enslaved people, I always say this is not something we created, it is something we've inherited. And with that inheritance comes the opportunity, it comes the beautiful possibility, it becomes the honor, it comes the responsibility for us to speak truth and for us to work together to reduce the harm and to create greater communities and a greater world together. And I am sure you all agree that that requires that we come together in order to build the world we want to live in and the world we know that we can create. So I thank you for joining us for this land and this people acknowledgement. I'm going to invite all of us to take a deep breath in through the nose. Hold for 2, 3, 4. Exhale for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Nice. Now, I'm going to pass it back to Kristian because we have some exciting things to talk about today.
Thank you, Cole. I appreciate it. You know, our commitment to exploring connections across humanity continues today as we dive into today's conversations about musical connections.
And we have a really fire panel for y'all. One of the things that we wanted to look at this year for TDO Connections is how music impacts all of us. So for this conversation, we're looking at musical connections. I will not do them justice if I introduce them, so we'll have our wonderful panelists introduce themselves. Can you all tell us who you are, and then if you can share an important memory that includes music? And we'll start with Michelle.
Stay ready.
Peace, love, and light, everyone. My name is Michelle N. Gibson, and I am a professor of practice at Southern Methodist University. I reign from the amazingly beautiful, enriched, and rooted city of New Orleans, Louisiana. I've been here since 2005, Hurricane Katrina. We all know the story. And I am the daughter of the late Reverend B.A. Gibson. I am the daughter of Miss Carolyn Ann Gibson. I am the granddaughter of Reverend Dorothy Mae Himes. So in just saying who I am the daughter of, that goes to show you right now I am a church girl. I was raised in the church, sitting on the pew every Sunday. So the second part of your question is a memory of how music...
Memory that includes music.
Girl, she's from New Orleans.
Yeah, I know we have a lot of them. All of us up here have a lot of them. It's hard to choose one, but the one that your heart calls to right now.
You know, growing up in the church, there was no way you can not be surrounded by music. Now, when you talk about music, growing up in the black church, right, we're not talking about a score. right? When you say music as a cultural identity and a cultural ritual practice, that's what call and response is built on, right? So in the Black church, it was always a ritual for someone to start, and the community responded. And so once they responded, there was something beautiful about the composition being created in the moment, which was created through prayer, which was created through testimony, which was created through lived experiences where spirit lived, right? And so even prior to being raised in the Black church, just coming from New Orleans, and everybody knows that New Orleans is the roots of jazz, honey. Now, we can talk about scholarship and all the other stuff, but when you talk about New Orleans, everything around us, even the way that the waves in the Mississippi River flow, has a polyrhythmic sound, right? In the streets, polyrhythmic sound. So my memory is memories, right, which have become a part of my lived experience. So there's not just one, it's a lifetime of experience.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Paolo, thank you for being here. Can you let us know who you are and share a memory that includes music?
Thank you, Quo, and thank you, Kristian, for this beautiful idea of inviting us in this TDO connection. I am chorus director and head of music at the Dallas Opera, and I'm general and artistic director of Lakmus Festival, which is Lake Como International Classical Music Festival in Italy, northern part of Italy. I have a lot of memories, but one was when I was working in Germany, in the north part of Germany near Hamburg. I organized a big music festival for young symphony orchestras. And we had symphony orchestras coming from Berlin, Hamburg, and the city where I was living in Schwerin. And we invented the Hip Hop Academy in Berlin. And I said, let's put everything together. We were in an outdoor place, and the orchestra was formed by 400 people. And we started with Also sprach Zarathustra by Strauss, you know, the film tam pam pam tiram pam pam, the one of the film by Kubrick, Odyssey 2001. And then after this intro, we had a drum set that was starting to make a groove, and the people from the Hip Hop Academy were starting to rap on this groove. And we ended this concert with a chorus formed by 500 young singers, and we sang We Are the World,
I love it.
which is one of my favorite pieces ever, both for the text, the music, because I have a background not only in classical music, but also in rock, hard rock, hip-hop, heavy metal. If you want, I can talk to you later. So.
Lovely. Thank you so much for being here and joining us. Rebecca,
Pleasure.
can you tell us who you are and can you share a memory that includes music?
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. My name is Rebecca West. I go by the pronoun she, her, hers. I identify as a cisgender woman. I also identify as Asian, Asian American, Korean, Korean American, depending on the day. I am currently a music therapy professor at Texas Women's University. And one of the things I like to joke with my students is I'm originally from Michigan, grew up in Michigan. So I like to joke with my students, especially that are from Texas, have never left Texas, about my horrible Midwest nasal Michigan accent, which will eventually come through at some point. So sorry for that. So a little bit about memory with music. So we'll get into kind of more what music therapy is for those of you that don't know. But when I was studying music therapy at Michigan State University, I was helping out with this summer camp. And we had campers of various ages, campers of different types of diagnoses and needs and supports. And so my role as a student was I would go around to the different rooms where the campers were, and then I would pull one out if they needed a break, a sensory break, or just an opportunity to have a one-on-one music time with somebody. So I remember going into this one room where it was mostly adults, and generally adults that either had an intellectual or developmental disability. And so I pulled out this one gentleman, and was really neat as I can still kind of remember what they look like. So I invited them to this room, and this particular gentleman communicated primarily using ways other than words. So I just invited them to sit down at the piano, and without me giving any sort of instruction, this person just started playing on the black keys of the piano. And if you don't know, the black keys are a really easy way of playing a pentatonic scale. So it's just a 5-note scale, and any of the notes that you play, they work together. And so they just started playing, and so I sat down next to them, and I started playing on the bass end of the piano along with them. And we were about maybe 15, 30 seconds into playing together when I got chills down my spine, because I felt that we were in sync together. Without words, we were just playing together, and I could just tell we were communicating with each other in the music. And it's one of the most enduring, beautiful ways that I have ever been with a person in music before.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Just show of hands, right? Folks up here and folks out here, if you smiled while hearing any of their stories. Yeah. Because it's this beautiful opportunity for us to experience how music connects all of us, and then how music matters to who we are and our identity. So the point of today's conversation is to see where those musical connections exist between music therapy and wellness practices and operatic storytelling, as well as in cultural identity. So I'm extremely excited to have this panelist of amazing people with us here today. Everyone give them a hand, and then we'll continue on. Thank you. Go for it, Kristian.
So it's abundantly clear, just hearing the three of you introduce yourselves and your musical memories, that you have a special connection with music. I think all of us up here can agree to that. Can you tell us a little bit about music's role specifically in your profession? And I know that given what everybody does, that's probably a very broad question. But Paolo, let's start with you specifically. Let's talk about music directly in your profession.
Well, music is my profession. So, and in fact, I experienced in this last year the difficulty sometimes to just let the music bring me in another level. You know what?
Yes, sir.
We're giving you your amen chorus.
Yes.
When we say preach and you see finger snaps,
yeah.
that's
Okay.
exactly
That's
what
us
we
giving
mean.
you your amen
Yes,
chorus.
sir.
We're like, yes,
Great.
say that.
But due to the technicality of my job as a conductor or pianist or artistic director, sometimes I'm just hearing what's not working, what could work better. And so I prefer to answer to you, what's the role of music in my life? Because when it is a profession, it's really difficult you have to be professional, so you have to be there. But in my life, music is a sort of therapy, because I have the tendency I want things be perfect since I was a kid. I don't know why, but things cannot be perfect in life. I remember a friend of mine, he is a Japanese Zen monk, said, you see, you want to always see the sun perfect, like a round circle with nothing inside. We like always to see a black point there. And you see, our cup of tea, they are better when we break them and we put gold inside to see that there is this broken part. And so music is telling me in my everyday life that the perfection doesn't exist. And that through making music, because I have very high standards, so I imagine in my mind when I conduct an orchestra, the choir, oh, that's the standard, but you cannot never reach that standard because of the nature of imperfection of life. And so it brings me down to earth and saying, okay, be humble and try to embrace your imperfection. And this helps me to connect to other people, to the other people, and being part of something bigger. So music, for me, became and is a sort of therapy and a possibility to connect with others.
Well,
That's good stuff. That's good stuff. No, that's real talk. I love that talk about perfection, because that is something we talk about specifically in classical music a lot, and then we forget that we're telling stories. We forget that we are trying to connect with humanity with it, you know, and that strive for perfection can really suck the wind out of it. But I love what you said about we're never going to get there. We're still going to try our best, but to basically enjoy the ride. That's really what it's about. Let's go to Rebecca next. Same question, music's role in your profession.
So one of the commonest conceptions I guess people have about music therapy is I'll explain what I do and people will be like, oh yeah, I love to listen to music when I'm at home. And I'm like, oh, that's really great that you use music for wellness or to relax or as like maybe a therapeutic way of releasing, but that's actually not music therapy. Music therapy happens between a certified music therapist and at least one other person. So one of the beautiful innate things I think philosophically about music and humanness and the connection is all humans have an innate desire to express, to create, to explore. And I think as children, we have those opportunities readily available. And then somewhere along the way, as we get older, we lose those opportunities to create, to explore, to tap within ourselves, and to just have fun. And this is kind of like that idea of like just being free to make music and not focus on this idea of perfection. So my role as a music therapist is to use and tap into that innate musical way of being to connect with somebody through music experiences to help support them where they are and where they might want to go. So that could include anything from helping an individual that had a stroke because of aphasia is not able to tell their partner that they love them. And then I can use singing, which engages all parts of the brain in order to be able to look at their spouse and then say, I love you back. I've been able to help children with autism and in music say their first words, which is really exciting. I've gotten a chance to work with individuals that have experienced trauma, finally have a place to explore that trauma so that they get to rewrite the narrative of what that trauma is like for them. So those are just a few examples of ways we use music and music therapy. And I'll get into probably a little bit later tonight. There's a lot of positive associations we have with music, but there's also some negative ones that we can have. And it kind of goes into why music therapists are specifically trained in knowing how and when and why to use the music that we're using.
It's so interesting. I want to hear more.
We will.
We will. And we will. All right, Michelle, same question.
Repeat the question. No, I'm just playing. You know, it's been two people speaking before me.
Yeah.
No, so there are two ideas for me when it comes to music, because I have to speak about it from a personal sense, right? As an artist, when I'm teaching choreography and composition to my students, before you can create anything, you need to take a moment to have a self-reflection of who you are, to understand your interests, right? Like, what is this narrative about? We haven't even gotten to music yet, right? We don't get to music until the very end, right? In this scenario with composition. And so, who are you? What are your interests? When you do hear music, what does it make you feel? How much are you connected to this feeling? How often are you connected to this feeling? This is before we even use music, right? Because I think for choreography and for choreographers, there's two things that can happen. Music can be the motivating force of the choreography. The music itself can set the work, or the work can be set and the music can be added to once you understand what the narrative is. So from a choreographic, explorative way, it's different ways that we figure out how we want to utilize the music. Now, the music, most of the time, for me as a choreographer, connects to what the narrative is from the deepest depth of an emotional space. I'm not talking about movement in the body. Because when we talk about in-body practice for dancers, the practice comes from our internal spiritual lane and vessel. And then we study that, and that's the embodiment that ultimately what you see as a performance. So it's a whole journey that we go through in our bodies as dancers and choreographers to figure out, like, does this music even make sense to what the movement is? Am I creating the movement and being influenced by the words? Or am I the words, right? Personally, I'm so thankful for music because, listen, music has saved my life many times. Now, I don't know about y'all, but no, yes, I do. We've all been in high school, college. We've had those loves. You were in love, right? Then you break up. And for some reason, you go and start to play music. And this music you play is the music that matches your emotion. You put on Donny Hathaway For All We Know. I remember listening to that on loop about 50 times. And the deeper he got in his voice was where I was deeply emotionally in my pain. So personally, I've utilized music to create space for me, to be honest with myself about where I am. If I want to praise the Lord, I put a good old gospel on. I put a Mahalia Jackson on.
You just took the words right out of my mouth.
I put a Shirley Caesar on.
Yes.
Because when I want to worship, I want to get as close to God for myself. And it's something about hearing that alto bass fall in the center of you. I fall with it. So music has given me space personally to meet myself in places where sometimes I didn't think I was going to make it. And it also allowed me to rejoice, right? And so for me, it's a personal identity, and it's also a different structure as a choreographer, because then you have to make sure it makes sense in the end, I guess. I don't know, right? So, yeah.
And I love this because we get to see in real time all the ways that music shows up. Paolo, you said that rather than in your profession, because you're seeking perfection, you spoke about what music means for your life. And I see so many connections in what Rebecca shared and what it means for people to literally be able to communicate, which is what we need as human beings, and what it means for us to question who we are, to do that exploration, not to seek a perfect self, because perfection does not exist, but to try to attain and to try and get there in a way that's meaningful. I also love that with everything y'all shared, it was not just a personal journey that you went on by yourself, but that it also involved other people. I can hum to myself. I can do that. Harmony is fun though, right? Harmony is fun as we, as human beings, go about the act of creating our story and our experiences. It also requires that we share space with other people. And then to also determine why we're here, what story we're trying to tell, and how we want to tell it, which is so integral in opera as well. So I appreciate each of you for sharing that. My question, I'm going to direct it to Michelle first. You hail from the beautiful, complex, culturally rich city of New Orleans. And you also share in your work that you're a cultural ambassador. Now, some people may not know, but New Orleans was actually considered the city of opera for the United States. They had 5 opera houses for each language because opera was such a big part of the culture in New Orleans. So
and some of the buildings are still there.
Some of the buildings are still there. That's different from what we do here in Texas. We'll knock a building down and be like, we don't know what you're talking about.
Yep.
New Orleans, they'll say, oh, this is nice. This was built in the 1600s. Look at it. Okay, great. And so my question for you, you spoke about jazz. We've made a bit of a connection for opera. As a cultural ambassador, music is such a part of how each culture expresses. There is no culture that exists, no human culture without music. Can you share some of the ways in which music shows up in your ambassadorship? And can you share some of the connections you've experienced with other cultures as a cultural ambassador?
So let's just be clear. When someone is defined as an ambassador and what the word ambassador actually means, right? Just in brief and in short, to be an ambassador is a calling because you have to lead, right? You have to be ready to take in every energy that is in front of you and around you. As an ambassador, you can't be afraid to not know what's going to happen, but trust that the culture is going to lead you exactly where you should be and where the people should be. There's all kinds of ambassadors. There are hair ambassadors. There are fashion ambassadors. So what is the cultural impact? What is the culture about, right? What I always tell people is that I didn't ask to be what I am. I didn't ask to be what I am. It was an anointing. And when you have an anointing over you, it starts really early, because that means that you're surrounded by other humans that also have this gift and anointing, and they pour into you. And so coming up in the church once again and being from New Orleans, I was poured into. And so seeing and watching how people respond to spirit in cultural spaces has always been intriguing for me. To see people that don't know each other, but they hear these polyrhythms playing, and some kind of way all of their heartbeat align on the same downbeat without having rehearsed it, without having composed it, is intriguing to me. And so I've always utilized that in my practice, and as a leader to utilize, to encourage humanity to take a minute and stop and hear each other's heartbeat and watch how that rhythm rolled together. That's kind of how jazz, the improvisation of jazz is about, that heartbeat, honey. And then that heartbeat that falls on the and mine stays on the one, and we're able to hear the and the one together and still roll on one accord. So leading communities, I've been all over. I thank the Most High that I've had doors open where I can be in France, where people might not know anything about New Orleans and how we move down the streets and what we call second lines as a community, how we gathered in this place for 2 years called Congo Square, of different shades and hues of brown people that came from different parts of the diaspora that ended up at the Port of Orleans in Congo Square, not speaking the same language, but we heard the same rhythm. That makes me want to keep going, because that's really what's going to heal humanity. See, people trying to figure it out. Like, I'm not into politics, right? But one thing I do know about humanity is when we are all on one accord, there is power. And so if I can be the ambassador to put these moments in different spaces around the world, that's where the healing and the therapy takes place. So I decide to lead knowing that I am a part of not just a cipher of sound, but I'm a part of a community of knowingness and unification that we need in this world right now. Amen. And utilizing that as the motivating force and the tool to heal this place through the therapy, through understanding the levels of where we are in our perfection, through us being humble and authentic when we hear the thing and stop acting like we don't hear the call and respond. That encourages me to keep going in that cultural realm and in that responsibility as Harriet Tubman led, Ashe. I will continue to do the same.
Well, all right, everybody.
Anyway, so this wraps up our panel. Girl, you
I think we can.
Well, thank you, YouTube. I mean, like, all right. Yeah. No, that's a word.
I love this so much. Y'all gonna hear me say I love a lot of stuff, because I do. But what we also hear is the way in which the culture that is present in one space can have such an impact and have a meaningful space of appreciation, of inquisition, of collaboration in other spaces as well. I have a really quick request. I know you don't ask, in opera, you don't ask singers to sing because they sing all the time, but I'm gonna be really blunt about it. Would you all be willing to hum a melody that is meaningful to you? Or a popular melody? Maestro, you mentioned We Are the World, which I was thinking about earlier today, actually. So I'm going to start with you first, if you'd like to have us all join you in that. I said you.
You start the hum.
You can do the words or the melody, whichever is most meaningful for you.
There comes a time
Yeah.
when we need a certain call, when the world must come together as one. There are people. It's true, we'll make it matter. Just you and me, and then everyone.
Nice. Beautiful. And you know, I'm going to ask y'all, show of hands if you smiled. Right? My cheeks hurt because I've been smiling the whole time. What we get to see, even if it's not loud, even if it's not perfect, even if we don't know the words, even if we're not familiar with the melody, we get to see the way that music calls our attention in such a way. I'll share, we were doing a master class once, and one of the emerging artists was working on this particular section one time, and I was in the back in this room doing my work. And David, shout out to David, told him, he said, give the tenor cry. Give me the tenor cry, right, to get the huh out of it. I promise you, I stopped everything I was doing because it was not possible for me to continue carrying on with my work, because from human to human, I needed to pay attention. And so many times, that is that connection, that's that demand that opera pulls from people, which is why we do what we do in talking about the human voice. So thank you, Maestro, for being brave and being bold and sharing that with us so that we could all experience it as well. I'm going to pass it over to Kristian.
To do what?
To sing. Okay.
Okay, let's go. No. Are you serious? You want me to hum something?
No,
Okay,
no.
I'm like.
Unless you feel like it.
I'm
No,
like-
no, you can ask the next question.
I know one that you'll definitely recognize. God Almighty, God above. You know the Mahalia Jackson. Come Sunday. Duke Ellington. Oh yeah, it was good stuff. All right.
Come Sunday, oh come Sunday. Yep.
When she sings the end of the Psalm 23, and it sounds like flat out like an Enrico Caruso cadenza at the end. It does. Go listen to it if you think I'm playing. That's why we know it's connected. But she used to say that she sat outside of the rich white people's houses while they were playing them on those old Victrola, his recordings, and that's how she got into opera. And that informed some of her vocal technique. See? Connections. All right. All right. So, Rebecca, let's chit-chat about this, because I definitely want to hear more about this. But we know that music has a role in our lives and culture. We've heard a brilliant explanation of that. But we also experience something physiological when we are singing together. We talked about the heartbeats being in sync. I've experienced this several times, especially as a choruser. So my question is, can you share what music does to the body and the brain?
And actually, when you were talking about that whole idea of syncing up, so I'm going to get nerdy with terms because I'm a researcher and I am a nerd. So
We love
I'm a
nerds.
proud nerd. So there is like an evolutionary sort of existence, survival aspect to this idea, but it's really when you sync up with somebody rhythmically, melodically, even with your heartbeat, that is called entrainment. And so, or attunement. So this idea of when you're with someone in a space and you actually start to move with somebody, and you know, like if I was to start like tapping my feet, probably all of you instinctively would probably start to nod your head to the beat, or you're going to start tapping along. You're going to start just attuning and locking in. And so, again, you're hearing this outside force. And so it's oscillating at a specific tempo. And the cool thing about this example of the heartbeat is our bodies have rhythm. Our heartbeat has a rhythm. Our breathing has a rhythm. Even our digestive and circulatory systems have a rhythm. And so because of that, our internal self actually wants to connect and sync up when it hears an external rhythmic source. And so when you hear something like an external tapping or clapping or someone else moving, we just instinctively start to pair up until we are in sync with them. And that could be a little bit from a survival of evolutionary perspective. It's also the fact that, again, in a musical perspective, we want to connect with other people. And so being able to be in sync rhythmically, musically, and attuning with them is that way of how we can do that. So in the brain, and again, I'm going to get super nerdy. I'll try to keep it really concise. So there is this old myth that music, that there's two hemispheres in the brain. The left hemisphere actually controls the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere controls the left. And what joins them together is the corpus callosum. The neat thing about music is we used to think that music was like the right side of the brain. Some of you may have heard that, and the left was like the math, logic side of the brain. We know that that's not true. Music is actually processed in all parts of the brain. So specifically in the frontal lobe of our brain, which is where we have these, quote, higher executive functioning areas like decision making. So being able to decide, like, how much am I going to, like, space apart this one beat from another as a choreographer, being able to make a decision in the moment of, like, you know what, this doesn't feel right. I'm going to do this again, and let's just put this in. There's the hippocampus, which is one of the memory banks. There's the amygdala, which is one of our emotional store warehouses. Even our cerebellum that helps with rhythm, which my rhythm isn't always so great. We also have the motor cortex, which is responsible for rhythm. So even being able to clap, right, on beats 2 and 4, everyone, right? All of that is requiring all of these different parts of the brain to work together. And so whenever we're engaging, even when we're watching somebody, we're still noticing that parts of the brain are activated. It's not as much as if you're actively, like, clapping. So if you were to start clapping, parts of my brain would be firing, but it wouldn't be as much as if I'm actually clapping along with you. And so that's just sort of, in a nutshell, I could keep talking about this because I really love this sort of stuff, but that's just sort of in a nutshell some of the physiological things that are happening in the brain. And one of the neat things, again, of why this matters for my role as a music therapist, I gave the example of speech. But I've worked with people that have experienced a stroke and also had the side that was affected by the stroke paralyzed, and they're kind of recovering it. So the really neat thing about being able to walk with a beat is that I start with where they are, and then eventually what I do is I start playing or singing a song that's really meaningful to them, and because of entrainment, they start to walk in step with me, and then there I am in a hospital, walking backwards, playing my guitar with someone, and then I have my person in front of me walking with their physical therapist standing behind them. So, and then in the case of the example that I had where I was working with an individual who needed to use some of these phrases just like help or I love you, again, being able to use that speech because of the way that the brain is impacted. So there's 2 primary language centers in the brain. So there's Broca's, which is like basically here, and then there's Wernicke's, and that's basically right behind it. And so unfortunately, the majority of strokes tend to happen in the left hemisphere. So the right side of the body is impacted. So sorry, 90% of you, that's your dominant side. I happen to be one of the only people in my right mind. That's a joke. Lefties get. And so, unfortunately, what ends up happening is obviously your dominant side is impacted when you have a stroke on the left side. And unfortunately, depending on where the bleed in the brain occurs and the extent to which it occurs, you end up with some sort of expressive communication disorder. So aphasia is where you know what you want to say, but the connection from your brain to your mouth has been disrupted. So you could point to this bottle of water, you could hold it up and say, Rebecca, what is this? And what we sometimes see with people is I'll point to it and it'll be like, I know what it is, but I literally can't get that connection to say bottle or water bottle. And so because that pathway is broken, but because music is activating all parts of the brain, what I like to tell people is that it's working kind of like this stroke took out a bridge. And so now you've got this road and the bridge has been broken because of the stroke. Well, music kind of goes around and does a little detour and uses other roads and backways and creates new bridges, so that way the person can sing I love you or help. So great example, if you know help, I need somebody.
Help.
Exactly. So I had a client that liked the Beatles, and help is a really important functional phrase that you need to be able to say. And on their own, they weren't able to say it. So I would ask, if you need some assistance going to the bathroom, what can you say? And because of the pesky aphasia, wasn't able to get out help. But as soon as I started singing, help, I need somebody, they immediately started singing with me because of the way that the music is using different parts of the brain. And then eventually we did fade out the music because ideally we wanted them to be able to just say help on their own, which they eventually were, which was really cool. So sorry, that was a really long answer, but there's a lot of cool things happening.
No, that's so cool. That's so cool. That's amazing.
It is. And it brings forward the way, I love the language that we're using in the way that music kind of helps to create the bridges and create the pathways where the bridges are no longer present. And we've heard, I grew up hearing, right, where words fail, music speaks, those things. But truly, where we're not able to speak, music does it for us. Music provides us with a way to do it together. I have a question as well concerning storytelling. So bringing it to opera, what we are doing is telling stories. We are master storytellers in opera. I always say that we are masters at playing pretend as well. We're like, we got a story to tell y'all, and we got some stuff we want y'all to see, and we want y'all to come in here and watch it, right? We're great at that. Can you let us know what is that connection with music and storytelling? I love this idea of attunement, well, not idea, but the act of attunement when we hear music. Do you know if something similar happens when we're hearing stories?
And this is the beautiful thing, just again, culturally speaking, that you alluded to earlier, that in basically every culture group that we know of, there is some form of music. And so whether that is humming, whether that's singing, this has happened in just about every cultural group since the beginning of time, and that is the use of music to accompany different rituals, different events, even specific times of day, or when somebody dies, or when somebody is born. Literally, music is the soundtrack of our lives. And so having music be that connection point. So it's kind of funny because I also was trained in more that Western European classical style. And in so many cultures, you just grow up singing. You just grow up playing an instrument. There isn't this formal training. It's really this just in-the-moment cultural tradition of you make music. You are musical. So again, tapping into that inherent creative aspect that I mentioned before. But this idea of storytelling, this is part of culture's way of surviving and passing down who they are as a culture, and what's important to them is through music. It's why liturgy, for a lot of people in various religious houses of worship, it's so important to them, especially around this time of year. We just came out of the Jewish High Holy Season, and all of the beautiful rituals and ways music is connected to their culture. And so when we're heading into, obviously, for Christians in Christmas, and so all of the storytelling that's happening there, but music is such an integral part of why we tell the stories that we do and the connection that it has.
Well, thank you so much. I could nerd out as well. I'm gonna not, I'll save that for later. I'm gonna pass it over to Kristian.
That's when we just pull her to the side later on and be like, look, we want to hear more. Selfishly, we want to hear more. Paolo, this question is for you. You know, your role is all about music and storytelling. I've seen you do this in rooms with my own artists. So can we get into some of the ways that music is used in opera? What difference does music make in opera? Can the storytelling still be the same if we don't have music?
Music is an amplification of the words in case of opera. And it helps to bring to the word a non-semantic cosmos. Semantic is, I say, this is a table. But if you say, what is this?
Yes.
So music as universal language is adding to the world something that we cannot really grab with our rational part and bring us in a world of emotions. You know that famous sentence, in the beginning was the word, you know, of the most famous book in the history. But someone said in the beginning was the sound. And the Big Bang. And we are vibration that connects. We are microcosmos, and there is the macrocosmos, the planets. They turn around, they have their rhythm, and they have their sounds. So bringing this macrocosmos in the microcosmos of the opera helps to emphasize a meaning that normally is more rational. In fact, it's interesting if you bring a melody and you put different words, that melody same the same. Yep. It's the same. You say, libiamo degli, I love you, baby. You know, yep. Libiamo from. So what's most powerful? Music. Because in the end, you want, you know, how many words are you retaining when you hear music, an opera that has maybe 1,000 of words? Very few. So that's the power of music, adding something to the sound. And in fact, there is a nice book by Nietzsche, The Birth of Tragedy, because in the past, the Greeks were using music to transform your feelings. When you go to opera is about love and death. All the operas about love and death. And what do you do? If you are sad and you see a comedy, you laugh. If you laugh too much and you see a tragedy, you cry. I'm very simplifying. I apologize for this but that's all about. It's a ritual of transforming yourself through what you see on stage. But what does music on people on stage? I come back what I was saying. Sometimes I cannot really let it go and just go inside because of my profession. So it's also, when I'm conducting the choir, there is this relation between me and the choristers, and then when we perform on stage, this relation is transformed into the audience, with no apparent relation, because the audience doesn't know me or the choir. So in this moment, we are creating a bond, but if we are doing Traviata, the original idea came from a composer, Verdi, who lived almost 250 years ago, and then had this idea, read this book, and wanted this libretto and put this music. So also this is interesting. What is telling Verdi in these days in Dallas, at the Dallas Opera, where people are living different, but that message still comes. Allow myself a small personal story. In 2017, after the last spring opera at the Dallas Opera, I was here with my wife, Katia, and our son, Leonardo, who will turn 8 tomorrow. He was 1.5 years. I took a car. I went to Shreveport, down to Louisiana, down to New Orleans. Because in my youth, I'm still young, but I was more youth than now.
That's right, you are.
I was the pianist of one of the first gospel choir in Italy called Greensleeves Gospel Choir. We brought gospel in Italy. I did my first Everybody Can Sing the Lord. We brought all this music in Italy because church are very sad in Italy. Everyone is very stiff and very,
that's
we have this untuned guitar. And when we brought the gospel, everyone was, and all my youth was, I was listening to jazz, to gospel, and to this way of, because jazz has this improvisation part, where you have a 32 measure of a melody and harmony, and then boom, you start and you. In the classical music, you have a score, an orchestra score of 400 page, made for an entire orchestra that you have to follow. Right? So I totally understand when you see that this freedom of getting into something you don't know. Can you imagine at the Windspear during Traviata that people start to sing Traviata all together? No, it's not possible. But if you give a rhythm and a groove, the groove is something the classical music doesn't have, and I'm an advocate for the groove, you know. The groove. You can, or the blues. I have a blues. The old people always say the blue devil's inside. And so, coming from a land, Italy, where opera was basically invented, and going through the old path and discovering jazz, blues, and gospel, I realized that the unicity of music is being a universal language. If we now start to speak, you start to speak, we don't understand. But if we start to sing, we create harmony. And I think that for me, now I am at a point where I am trying to understand the professional part. Because if you are professional, you have to deliver. You know, people pay a ticket to come and see the opera because, you know, you need a lot of... When you sing with your friends, or when I play I like to improvise for friends and sing, it's just for you. So, and sometimes I'm trying to bring this part of freedom also in the professional life. And when I conduct, when I play, try to forget myself and go into these waves and try basically to make that these waves can have a healing power for all of us.
Okay, and thank you all for coming.
This is the second time we done had to rap.
This is such a beautiful thing as we look at what opera does and what it means for people, because opera is such a collaborative art form. In so many ways, you cannot do opera without someone else. And in real time, we see people collaborating and connecting. We see the synergy of all of it. We see what's happening with the set, with the costumes. We see what's happening when people are flying in pieces. We see what's happening with the chorus that you've prepared. We see how the conductor is bringing it all together. Do you, in some of the things you just said, do you approach preparing artists in a different way because of the music? Or do you find those nuances of allowing them to be a part of the music?
In a different way, related to which other way?
And related to the ways that we have to prepare a chorus for a piece. You just said, right, you have to deliver. But are there also moments where you see that the artists are still within that space of freedom, even if it's confined within the score?
Yes, and I feel my duty is to create this moment of freedom. Because I always say, when you rehearse, you can really be sometimes very hard to the other people. You can be mean, you can be whatever you want. But in the moment of the performance is the absolute freedom, because you don't speak. And I remember talking with a lot of colleagues, and they say, oh, music, as a conductor, you decide everything, you drive. I said, in the rehearsal, yes. Because you have, we say, the knife from the part of the, how do you say? The knife is made by a, yeah, you have the knife from the handle. Yeah. But when you perform, there is no words. Yeah. So I feel my duty is to give this land of freedom in which everyone can express themselves when we will be in the performance, because our last goal is the audience. Yeah. So that's what really I feel, and I feel that also giving the space to everyone to express themselves, having in mind the final goal, because as a conductor you have the big picture, you see the score, you see soprano 1, 2, 3, 4, you see violin, and the violinist just see his part. But every part counts. The last stanza of the violins is as important as the solo clarinet, because the solo clarinet cannot exist without the accompaniment of the violinist. That, can you imagine a tenor singing a high C by himself all the evening?
I mean, it would be impressive.
Can you?
But
can you imagine a conductor without orchestra? And I always say, what do? We move air.
Yeah. And work out your arms.
Technically speaking. So I think this is also a process that, again, make yourself being healed through the music.
Thank you for that, because in this I hear, just as we said, music in this art form of opera, but just in this existence of human life, is not something we create and experience by ourselves. And even as you were sharing, Rebecca, I got chills and I got goosebumps, which I'll ask you about later, right? I'm sure we all want to know. But to understand that someone's ability to have a rhythm for walking very much connects in how someone else is creating the opportunity for them to have the ability to take the steps. So thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you, Maestro.
So, shameless plug, we definitely have operas coming up. We open Panelists tomorrow. Speaking of storytelling, get your tickets if you have not already. But Michelle, I want to talk with you a little bit because you are a choreographer and you speak a lot about, especially in your opening talk earlier when you talked about how does the music inform the movement? You know, does the story inform the movement? All of those different things rolled in together, right? Especially when you're starting to work with artists. So can you speak a little bit about working with artists and working with artists and also the average person with music?
You know, artists, those people. It is a different experience working with artists versus working with community, because there's, in our training, it is so rigorous, both mentally and emotionally first, then physically third. You said something about, can you see the composer without the orchestra? I was sitting and thinking, can you see the dancers without the choreographer? Right? There's a ownership that a choreographer has, because we come in with the narrative. The dancers never know what's going to happen. They don't know the narrative. They don't know anything. They just there, right? So there's something about dancers' ability to walk into a space of unknown and realizing that they have just a few seconds to conform, right? In the process of choreography, there has to be a clear understanding on the side of the choreographer to know what is, what's not, what can work, what's the possibility. Now, some choreographers come into rehearsals with their choreography notated. Honey, some people come in with the notebooks, you understand? And they have written out, like a composer, they have it notated what the whole piece is going to be, right, prior to coming into rehearsal. Me, because I'm a rebel, on the other hand, I believe in, I have never choreographed the same work in my life. I have never reset any of my works. Every university that I've gone to and set works has been different works because the people are different. So we talk about music inside of choreography. The music for me is a part of the lived experience, which we call phenomenology. How we live it, right? The music informs my work after the movement is created, because I don't want my dancers to be influenced by the music. So I set the choreography first, and then I say, this is the music we're going to use. But as a choreographer, I have to be intentional about what the story is saying, because the dancers are equipped physically to do anything, right? When you're trained, honey, especially when you're young and trained, honey, you can do it all. So, you know, Miss G be like, put your leg way behind your head, and I want you to turn around, like stuff that I know is impossible, right? But But giving them space to be in their body inside of the experience, going back to culture, there's no way possible that in the culture, music and dance are not living in the same space at the same time. In West African, there are a lot of traditional dances that were created with movement and a song attached. Because the movement is about an experience, right? So there's a dance that's called Sente, right? And Sente is the dance of harvest, right? And you do this dance specifically as a prayer to hope that your harvest is plentiful so it can feed your family. So as you're doing this dance, you're doing it with a reverence of prayer so that the growth in the earth can come up so everyone is fed. So there's an embodied practice, there's an embodied experience that I'm thinking in my head, all those places. I need to talk to you too, because I need to know about all that, what you was talking about. There is something that I understand that this dance means this, so my body is going to adapt and conform to the experience. The music joins it, and the music, the language that the music is spoken in, is the prayer, right? So in culture, you will find the alignment of music being a part of the actual lived experience. The movements, planting, become a part of the actual experience. So for us, even when you talk about bringing cultural aesthetics to the proscenium stage, right? We talk about this a lot. How do we bring culture to the stage and maintain the reverence and authenticness of the culture in 12 minutes when we know that this dance is a dance that is done as a transitional support of somebody passing that takes 3 weeks in the community, right? So here in America, when we perform or choreograph or compose anything that's culturally driven, it's still not done in its authentic timing. Because of timing. So then for us as dancers, we have to very quickly understand the when, the where, the why, and the how, because we don't have much time to sit in the ritual, but the ritual has to surface in a few seconds. Embodiment, the music, when the drums are playing, we can't ignore the drums. You can't ignore the claves or the bata or the kinkani. You can't ignore any of that. So then we hear this music. We know that there's an experience behind this music. So that means that our listening ear has to make sure it hears so that that rhythm can settle in our spirits properly. So music and dance, especially as it relates to culture, it rolls on the same journey. It's that you can't separate the two. It's impossible. And Baba Chuck Davis, God rest his soul, R.I.P. Baba. He would always say, Baba Chuck Davis was a choreographer, he was a scholar, he was a humanitarian, he was an activist. Baba Chuck Davis was one of the African-American choreographers and dancers who kind of was one of the ones who brought West African to the proscenium stage and showed us how ritual could live in a timely manner. But at the same time, Baba was very adamant about us sitting in our authentic space in a short amount of time. And so he made sure that we knew the songs. We had to see, dancers we had to sing in the culture. Like, you may be the best shuffleball changer, but your voice, we have to sing. We don't just dance in West African. In flamenco, there are songs. In Brazilian samba, in Afro-Cuban, Afro-Haitian, there's a song and there's a dance. And in the culture, it is a requirement that we study and learn. Now, there are a lot of songs. I didn't know some of them words, y'all. And because I have such good melody, I knew how to keep up with the melody. That's how I made it through. But going back to the end of that, just knowing that in culture requires music and movement to be present. In New Orleans, there is no way possible you can go to a jazz club and just sit back and just let it. The music is going to rest somewhere in your body where, like you said, if one person starts tapping, We all feel that downbeat, right? The power about polyrhythms is you can fall inside of that downbeat wherever you want. So this is the exercise. Y'all got to add something. No, go ahead, therapist. Add another rhythm. We're going to switch the rhythm. So now you add another rhythm on this downbeat. A. Find it. Hey. The power of us listening to each other and the power of us being vulnerable. Culture also allows you to be vulnerable to what you hear and trust that what you hear is right. Ashe.
Thank you for that. And absolutely. And growing up also in the Black church, the rhythms that come so naturally, the syncopation that comes so naturally. So when I went to school and they were like, this is called syncopation, I was like, oh, really? That's what we be doing at church. Okay, I can do that. I got that. So thank you for sharing that. We're going to move into the close of our conversation. But what I'd like to ask before is for Paolo, what do you hope the audience, right? Michelle just gave us this example of what it means to be partakers as well as bystanders or witnesses. What do you hope the audience considers when they're listening to the operas? What musical connections do you hope they make?
I hope that they will understand that being in an opera house, first of all, you embrace all the human activities in art. Because you have scenes, so you have painting, you have carpenters, you have dance, you have singing, you have playing, you have words, you have everything that the human spirit can conceive. So I hope that they will understand that coming here is a transformational experience. For 3 hours, you just go in another planet. And when I told to our colleagues who works backstage, and I say, you see, we are working 1 year, almost sometimes, preparation, staging, set, music, musical parts, contracts. There is also this very insurances is the most dangerous, one of the most dangerous places in the world. Backstage. Is for 3 hours, 4, 5, 6 runs. So it's a concentration of energies of a community who wants this and who offer this. And so going and hearing an opera is, and listening and seeing and feeling an opera is entering in another cosmos for 3 hours, being able to transform yourself from inside to outside and outside to inside. Whatever you hear, it's a Baroque opera. We will do Orpheus by Gluck. We did Traviata. We do Pelléas. We are covering 200-300 years of music. But each of them can really resonates with you, and you can resonate with them.
I love the resonance, right, and what music does. For this final question, I'll say before we hand it over to the audience, Michelle, Rebecca, I said I was going to ask you a question about the goosebumps and things. You've talked about it before, and raise your hand if you've witnessed and experienced goosebumps when somebody's singing, where you're talking to someone. I've had it several times on stage. Can you tell us what is happening with our body when we get those goosebumps? And can you provide us with kind of some closing thoughts about how we utilize music in healthy ways and as part of our wellness practices?
Sure. So again, because music is stored all, and I love that you were talking about it being an embodied experience, because that is really what it is. And since music is being processed in all different parts of the brain, it's why one of the really neat things about what I get to do, if I'm working with older individuals that have dementia, unfortunately, one of the things that happens is they lose those memories because of the plaques and the tangles that are happening in the brain. But one of the things that continues to endure is their memory of music, particularly music that was meaningful to them, maybe when they were a young adult. And so it's this idea of the music is embodied within them, because when we learn music, it's not just the words. It's the music, it's the rhythm, it's the feeling, it's the entrainment. It's all of those things that we are accessing at the same time, and that's why you might not hear a song for 10, 15 years, you hear it and then you get the goosebumps, or you hear something really powerful. And so it's those places in our brain, like the hippocampus, our memory warehouses, the amygdala, our emotions that are really surfacing and allowing us to have that sort of like, to some extent, out-of-body experience, or like that, you know, the goosebumps that you experience. And so it's really powerful because of the way music is so embodied within us, and going back again to just that innate way that we want to use music to express, to explore. So I love this idea of, again, just talking about embodiment and all of the things coming together, because as people, we want to be able to use music in ways that benefit and support us. And we can do that in so many different ways. So just listening to music in the car, maybe it's like your only time by yourself. And so being able to jam out to music that you love. We know overall that music is going to have much more of a powerful impact if it's music that you already know and like, versus music that's novel or something that you haven't heard. It's not to say that you can't appreciate it, but if I were to play different pieces for you, one that you've never heard before and one that was one of your favorite songs, again, from a neurological activity perspective, everything would be going off for the song that you already know and prefer. So you can use music, and most people do. You just use music all the time. When you're cooking, when you're like trying to get your kids to do something from an academic standpoint. This is why we really need to protect music education, because we remember things when it's paired to a song. So for example, ba-dum-bum-bum-bum.
I'm loving it.
All right, so McDonald's can now pay me. But it's why jingles are so powerful. It's why we learn certain, some of you might have learned mathematics tables, or even like the solar system. You probably still remember some of those songs, right? Because it's set to music. So being able to use music to help you remember things can be really positive. So in the addition of, we have sometimes really positive memories of music because of this wonderful embodied experience. And I just want to give just a forewarning to anyone in the audience or anyone that's watching that I am going to be talking a little bit about trauma and just some negative associations. So if you need to like step out or turn off your video, just take care of yourself. So part of my role as a music therapist is also advocating for the harm that can come with music. And so sometimes there are songs that people have associated with a loved one dying. It was playing in the background, and now they can't listen to that piece without being reminded. People have experienced horrific experiences, and music was playing in the background. There are stories of people that are in active combat that will listen to specific songs before they start their day to help them or when they come back. And so we know that while, yes, music can similarly, in good ways, give us these positive endorphins or chemicals released in our body, we know that music also, if we have a negative association with it or negative experience with it, that it can similarly, when we hear a song, it's going to bring back those memories. From a neurological perspective, what happens is our body goes into fight, flight, freeze. We go into survival mode, and then we're not able to, because the way that our processes work, it starts in the brainstem and moves forward. We're not going to be able to think critically. We're not going to be able to make a lot of decisions. And so I say that because there's a lot of trauma that's happening right now. There's a lot of events that have been traumatic for people. There might continue to be events that are traumatic. And so music can definitely be a positive resource for people. But if you find that as you're listening to music, it's causing you to maybe spiral further and further down into depression, into really dark thoughts about yourself or others, that might be when you might need to consult with a music therapist so that maybe you find a new way of reframing that relationship you have with music. So sometimes that's my role too, is I come in with people that have those negative experiences, associations with music. people that were involved with cults where music was a part of it, and being able to help them rewrite a narrative through music therapy in whatever way that might look like. So just encourage all of you that it's okay if you don't have always a positive relationship with music. That if that is a goal, then that is something that a trained music therapist could certainly help you with.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. We're going to open space in case anyone in our audience has a question or if any of our audience online would like to ask questions. And it's okay. I won't stare you down until you ask something, I promise. Okay. And do you all have any questions for each other? In working in the opera field, people are creating a lot of conversations. As I said, I'm excited because this brings together professionals and people who are passionate about music through different lenses and in different ways. So do y'all have questions for each other?
Hi. So I am very intrigued by music therapy. And I always wondered if it was important, especially in undergraduate studies, if BFA dance majors should take music therapy classes. Now, my concern is if dancers get deep into music therapy, is it going to distract their ability to embody the way we embody internally versus us thinking about it? Like, if I know where it's coming from my brain, am I going to start to lead myself in my training with my brain or with my body first? Like, you understand what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
how would you language this for dancers who are physical first? I'm not saying we're not mental, because we're both, because our kundalini is clearly aligned. But if we get too much in our head, then does that take away from us truly embodying as we naturally do?
Yeah, so great question. So, and then the field of music therapy is a field. So you have to have a minimum, at least in the United States, you have to have a minimum of a bachelor's degree in music therapy. So the one reaction I always get from parents is like, wait, it's an actual degree? Like, yes, it's an actual degree. And again, the reason for that is because like other allied health professions, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech, counseling, you are specializing in that area because, again, you could cause harm if you don't know how to safely transfer somebody from a bed to a wheelchair, if you don't know how to help somebody in feeding therapy know how to swallow properly so that food doesn't go down the wrong tube. That's why all of these specializations exist. So music therapy is also a separate field with training. So to get to your point, there's different philosophical orientations related to music therapy. A lot of what I've talked about is a little bit more like the biophysical, the neurological. But there is a lot of this, again, aspect of music, again, from just the natural ways of how we express ourselves. So part of our training is also understanding what the person in front of us needs musically and then figuring out how to meet them. So again, going back to this idea of embodiment, I have literally, when I was working at a rehab hospital, I would go and work with a stroke patient and sing Etta James, and then I would go to the peds floor and sing Wheels on the Bus, and then I would go up to the stroke floor and I would sing the Beatles. So my repertoire had to be pretty vast. So talking about a dance student maybe taking a music therapy class, it could give them a better understanding of the breadth and scope of music, how music can be applied in different situations, and at least from a personal perspective, it could certainly help them reflect maybe a little bit more internally on their own cultural identity and their background. That is something that we definitely make sure that we have our students do because we serve such a wide range of humanity. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question or not.
Actually, I'm going to ask a wonderful vocal technician and pedagogue, Kristian Roberts. Can you talk about, I'm talking to you. Can you talk about singers getting in their head? Because I think it provides a similar thing, right? Does knowing how the voice works and what's happening.
How much time do we have? We have about 5 minutes. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Five.
Yes, it is since singing is a more of a mental game than it is a physical game. I've said that many times. The voice teachers I study with have pounded that into my head as well, and it really is, and it's something that I even in my own teaching, I always say it starts here. And there are times where you're trying to, we spend so much time refining the voice and working to refine the voice, because opera singers don't use microphones, at least not in traditional opera. Now, there are modern works now that call for amplified sound and things like that, and we're in an age of experimentation, so that's going to happen, particularly in the 21st century. But the technical side of singing requires a lot of brain power. Because when I look at somebody, and it requires you to be in touch with your body in a way, because your body is the instrument, right? So a pianist, as frustrated as a pianist can get, hi, Quo's a pianist, but a pianist can walk away from that instrument for a little bit. I have to carry this thing around with me all the time. It is literally the way I speak all the time. It's similar to a dancer. A dancer has to walk around with their instrument all the time. And so when we are feeling sick, when we, the pollen, Lord help us in Central Texas with pollen, the pollen and the trees and everything that happens, it can really play a game with you, because you immediately go, oh, something isn't right. You drink a little water, to see if you're just a little dry or something like that, and panic ensues, right? Because we use this thing to earn some of our living, or some people their whole living, right? And so that's the trick of it. And so when I'm teaching someone and they say, I'm feeling a little under the weather today or something like that, first of all, we pull out the crucifix at that point. They're like, get out of here, because we're in the business of singing, right? So don't come in here with that, right? But if it's just allergies, that's when I have to tell them, you have to fall back on the technique. You have to fall back on the breath and how you're executing it, because literally there is no life without breath. So there's definitely no sound without a breath. All right. So that's the first thing that has to happen. And then the way that even across fields, right, I learned about how the vocal folds work through the Bernoulli effect from airplanes, right? So that's exactly what we have to learn. And so this is a very long answer, but the point is this: it is very much a mental game. And so if I'm approaching a score and I know there's an A flat, I'm a Verdi and mezzo contralto-esque person. I'm going to have to work for that harder than anybody else. So I have to vocalize above that A flat, so I can make sure when I get to that A flat that it's nothing, because I just sang a B flat or a C. Now, I might not put that B flat or C in public, but I have to put that A in public, right? So that's the thing. And so a lot of times, like I said, when even in my own teaching and my own experience and taking voice lessons myself, it really is a mental game. Yes, you use our bodies to do it, but it's not just these. We're literally taking the smallest group of muscles and tissue and bone and nerve endings right here and making all of this sound, right? And the idea, the first thing we want to do is muscle. I mean, we use everything. Well, I was a power lifter too. Singing is still the most athletic thing I've ever done. And you're talking about somebody that could deadlift 395 pounds. So when I tell you, it really is. It's a lot of mental energy that's put into it, because the minute you say I can't do it, the minute you say, oh, the note is too high, the minute you say, oh, I got the high note, let me go back down the scale and get lazy, you're out of tune. You have to concentrate so hard to stay in vocal resonance and stay in the vocal track. So it's real. And then that technique has to inform the word and the storytelling and the emotion.
You better bring it back around.
You
friend.
see how I circled around? I circled back
there.
around to the maestro. But he was the one that said that, and he said that a few weeks ago when we had an opera truck performance. He said, the technique informs the emotion. I said, Maestro, preach, because I always try to say that all the time. It really does. But I remember living legend Donnie Ray Albert. We did a talk back after we did Romeo and Juliet last season, and I say living legend because he's more seasoned than the rest of us. But what he said was he'd gotten sick during the rehearsal period. And in one of his first entrances, he talked about how when he ran up the stairs and came onto the stage, because he was playing Juliet's father, how he got winded. And he flat said in that talk back, I thought I was going to pass out. I thought I was going to hyperventilate. And what he said was, I thought about, what am I here to do? I am here to sing. And he fell back on what he knew. And that is the name of the game. He literally went inside of his mind and reminded himself. He said, I need to throw everything out the window right now and focus on making sure I breathe and sing that first line. And that's what he did. And we would have never known if he hadn't told us.
Thank you for sharing. As we come to a close, thank you to each of our panelists. Truly, truly appreciate you, your time, your passion, all of the beautiful jewels and gifts that you've given us tonight, just in sharing who you are and what you love to do and how you do it is so, so wonderful for all of us. Thank you for our audience who came to see us in person and for everyone who's joining us online. May we continue to make these musical connections across identities, across cultures. May we continue to know that it is what is in our innate humanity that we lean into each other, that we find those connections, that we be vulnerable enough to allow culture to lead us, and that we know we have the freedom and opportunity to create these beautiful moments together that give us goosebumps, that allow us to speak when we cannot speak, and that allow us to connect when it seems impossible. Thank you to the staff. Thank you. Shout out to our digital team. Thank you to Dallas Opera and our board and all of our supporters. We hope you have a beautiful evening.
Get your tickets.
Get your tickets. Am I off? Okay.